When a wrestling channel exists on YouTube, it almost seems it must have an obligatory video on the Montreal Screwjob. We are going to sidestep that and talk about a completely different Screwjob. Steve Blackman is one of the guys who everyone seems to remember and like from the Attitude Era. With a martial arts background and being built like he was cut out of stone, he absolutely looked the part of someone who wasn't to be messed with. He took a lot of work as a bouncer, but after getting into far too many fights, he realized he had to find another option for work. Steve Blackman began as a competitive bodybuilder long before entering professional wrestling, and you could really tell Steve Blackman was extremely jacked when he began his wrestling tenure in 1986. After attending wrestling school, he began working for the Hart family in Stampede Wrestling. His in-ring talent was there, but his promos left a bit to be desired. Even then, during this time in wrestling, with his physical frame, he was very much what most promotions were looking for, and he was able to get matches with many large promotions relatively quickly. Early in his career, Blackman would be able to wrestle for the World Wrestling Federation on some televised matches, as well as tour with New Japan. On his tour there, he was able to wrestle legends like Choshu, Fujinami, and Takada. However, this would be where Blackman would experience his first real issues in the wrestling world.
Well, at the time, like when I was in Japan, when I went over there, I had some problems in the States, so it's kind of bizarre to even say this, but I promised my family and my girlfriend I wouldn't get in any trouble over in Japan because I had some fights and stuff over here. So I'm like, okay, well, I get over to Japan, I'm there with Vader and Buzz Sawyer, total assholes. So anyway, I sucked it up, didn't do anything, and plus I have a copy of my contract somewhere. It was in my contract that if I screwed up or got in any fights over there, they could send me home with half the amount of pay I was guaranteed. Back then, you know, I mean, I wanted the money and needed the money. It was the first place I had been. So anyway, I put up with these two, and I just couldn't wait to get back to the States because I just wanted to pummel them. When we get back to the States, well, Buzz ran through the security checkpoint and threw his clothes in the garbage. We didn't have to check in or anything like that, and just ran. I never saw him again. But
after his return to the States, he was doing so well, he was being considered for full-time employment with the World Wrestling Federation. Unfortunately, during a tour, Steve would contract malaria and was bedridden for years, completely halting his wrestling career. Over several years, Steve Blackman was able to overcome his ailments and regain basically all of his muscle.
Vader, I actually went to Hershey that night. I hadn't seen him in 6 years or 7 years after I saw him in Japan, then I got over being sick, and I got my health back, was back training, and I actually went to Hershey in like 97, somewhere around there, just because I wanted to go up there. I went up there just to kick the shit out of him. So I walked in, Bulldog was in there, Owen was in there, well, the whole crew was there. And Owen's like, what are you doing here? I said, oh, and you were in Japan with me. I said, well, this is the first time I felt healthy and Vader's in town, so I came up here to beat the shit out of him. And they just looked at me. So I said hi to the guys and stuff, and Vader came down the hall, and I had my hair cut short. I had hair long back then.
Oh, okay.
And long story short, he came up, and I told him why I was there. Well, after he knew I was serious. I mean, it's like I squared off and said I came here for one reason,
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't know what happened back then. Well, he apologized to me twice.
Yeah.
I might sound like an idiot or a jerk saying this, but I really didn't want him to apologize because he and Buzz made life miserable for me for 6 weeks over there, and I wanted to beat the shit out of him bad.
Yeah.
So he apologized, and I looked like a total idiot at that point if I had started cracking somebody that's just apologized twice in front of 20 men, in the locker room. So I'm like, this is brutal, I said to Owen, and Owen's like, the hell with it. He goes, you apologize, who cares anymore? And then Bulldog's like, why don't you come back in? Well, then Brian Pillman was in there too, and it's funny, everybody I'm naming, but anyway, they all put in a word, Brett put in a word for me, stuff like that. Well, then I went to another one of the shows in Bethlehem, I think it was, talked with a couple of guys in the office, and then I worked my way in shortly thereafter. I was 22 at the time. But never not getting in any trouble while you're gone for 6.5 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I promise. Give me a break here.
Yeah.
Well, after promising, I get over here with the 2 biggest jerks on the planet.
Having turned what could have just been another instance of him getting into trouble for getting into a fight with Vader into a career opportunity. Steve Blackman began to garner a cult following during a year-long undefeated streak that had been snapped by Jeff Jarrett with the help of Tennessee Lee. After a brief feud, he was able to get his revenge on Jarrett. Steve Blackman had lost his winning streak and for the most part settled into the mid-card. But on one night in the spring of 1998, Steve Blackman wasn't just a mid-carder, he was a main eventer. It would take place on Monday Night Raw and would be facing the #1 contender. In the build-up, Vince McMahon had named Dude Love as the #1 contender to Stone Cold Steve Austin. For Monday Night Raw, the main event would put the lethal weapon in the ring with the #1 contender and a chance to move into the main event picture at stake. Blackman was fast to rip into Dude Love, and it becomes really clear these two work very well together. This match is actually really good and off to an awesome start. This was during the era of the eternal Vince versus Stone Cold feud, and on the final show before the championship match, Vince McMahon was constantly saying throughout the show that something catastrophic would happen.
I will guarantee you that something catastrophic will occur at Unforgiven.
To most people who had been watching, this was alluding to some sort of incident with the finish of the show's championship bout. After a brief exchange, Blackman loses control of the bout. Not long after that, he is put into the abdominal stretch. Blackman seems to be working his way out, but the bell rings.
The abdominal stretch on Blackman. And what? It's a winner! What the hell's that?
Blackman had clearly not submitted, but the bell had been rang. Blackman immediately began challenging what had just taken place, going as far as to hit a throw on the timekeeper. Stone Cold would run down to the ring and the show would go off in typical WWE fashion. This story doesn't have any deeper meaning than being able to talk about the time Steve Blackman was in a main event. He was a favorite of many people at the time, and being able to see him in such a prominent role was a really nice moment for some of us, even if it was so brief. The rest of Blackman's run was highlighted by his team with Al Snow, known as Head Cheese, along with him becoming the man with the most days as hardcore champion. As the invasion began, Blackman was moved down to developmental, where he shared the ring with future greats like Kaz Hayashi, Nigel McGuinness, and Charlie Haas. Blackman would retire in 2002 from full-time wrestling. He would go on to status in wrestling. His battle of coming back from being bedridden with malaria and achieving the full-time spot he missed out on all of those years ago is inspiring, to say the least. Furthermore, remembering that this all began because he wanted to beat someone up as revenge for bullying him. And that was what turned into him getting that job and being the guy who held a championship that was on the line 24 hours a day, more days than anyone, is quite an admirable feat. He would open a martial arts school and become a bounty hunter and bail bondsman in his hometown. Many people still remember his matches and run with the Hardcore Championship fondly, from being a guy who was getting into trouble with the law for getting into far too many fights, to retiring from pro wrestling to become a bounty hunter chasing down criminals. Steve Blackman's life has come full circle. Though I do hope he has used the glow sticks when chasing at least one bounty.